Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab is leading calls for a ceasefire so vulnerable people in war zones can receive the COVID vaccine. He joins us now. Good morning to you, Mr Raab. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning.
You're calling for this ceasefire. It's not the first time you've done this, of course, and it's something that we would all like to see happen more regularly. It's not been successful up until now. What makes you believe that these warring factions are going to listen to you?
Very difficult, and it's so important. That's why we need to keep trying it. It was tried last year. It was a French initiative that we backed. And the thing that we're looking out for here, the reason that it's so important, is you've got the triple whammy, if you like, the compound impact in these war-torn zones of conflict, famine and COVID. I think the difference this time around is that we've got the vaccine, and so that gives us a very clear opportunity to provide that lifeline to those particularly vulnerable people living in the particularly vulnerable areas.
Yeah, well, we have the vaccine, don't we? We have the vaccine over here and the vaccine rollout, and the procurement by our government has been fantastic. And I know that we are a huge contributor to COVAX, but a number of these countries, a number of these war-torn areas don't have access to the vaccine yet. They just don't have it. And so how are we going to get the vaccine to them in time for them to have this ceasefire in order to vaccinate them before the ceasefire ends?
So, as I was coming on to say, so what we're doing is not just leading in what we're doing in terms of our domestic rollout, but leading the way internationally. We hold the presidency of the United Nations Security Council, the international community's top body, and we're trying to achieve two things with the debate and the resolution we hope will pass. First of all, secure a ceasefire to allow logistically the vaccine to be distributed. And secondly, call for people to follow the lead, countries to follow the lead the UK has taken in supporting what's called the COVAX AMC mechanism. We've put £500 million into that mechanism that will secure 1 billion doses. And that's the way we get not just the lifeline, the route into those vulnerable people, but make sure there are vaccines that can get needles into arms. And I think that's something that the world can come together around, we hope. And certainly that's what Global Britain and the leadership that we're showing in the Security Council is all about.
It's a laudable aim. I don't think there's anybody that wouldn't want a ceasefire. I don't think there's anybody that would begrudge the idea of people getting vaccines because it benefits the whole world if they do. But I wonder if people might be surprised that that's what you want to talk about this morning, something that involving the global situation where something else that comes under your purview is being seen as an absolute shambles. And I'm talking about the situation with quarantining. Over the last couple of days, we've heard, and these are anecdotal, so if you can clear it up, then you know, that might be helpful, but that some people in charge of the security and control of those coming back in from these red-listed countries were only given the rules somehow 3 hours before. We've heard of people going to different airports to try and get out of it. We've had a member of our own staff who met somebody who'd just come back from Dubai and actually had got onto a public transport, didn't know anything about the quarantine, hadn't declared it. Who is checking that this very expensive hotel quarantine system, which some people are having to pay for, who is checking that the right people are actually doing it?
So first of all, Kate, the timing of this has got, I think it's rather cynical what you suggested. I don't think that's fair at all. The UK's presidency of the Security Council set well in advance, and this debate's been set well in advance. So
hang on, I wasn't saying anything cynical. We were told that you wanted to talk about that this morning, and it's an important thing to talk about. But I'm just thinking everybody watching that you've kicked up with that is going to be going, why is he talking about that when we've got this chaos at home? And it's my job to put their thoughts to you. So you're welcome to explain why you chose to put that above the situation that's such a fiasco.
No, I'm happy to talk about both things, and I think your approach is rather cynical. But let me address the question you've asked, which is, first of all, of course, we already have a system in place where anyone that's returned to the UK needs to take a COVID test, fill out the passenger location form. What we've done is insist on an additional line of defence through the government-commissioned hotel quarantine back home. It, of course, is a challenge. We're saying that unless you're a British national, you can't come back from these high-risk areas, these red list 33 priority countries. But in relation to British nationals, we've got to try and find a responsible and safe route through, and it's difficult to enforce. That's why, in relation to anyone...
It's difficult to enforce, but it is your job to do it. So, you know, who is doing it? Why aren't there the numbers at the airports? Why aren't there the people there? Why, for instance, in the hotels, people that have done the right thing, gone to the quarantine hotels, at vast personal expense to them, but money they may well not be able to afford. They're finding that actually that people in the hotels aren't wearing masks. They're being allowed to go out to smoke cigarettes, which makes a nonsense of the isolation. It's all very well to have the idea. It's actually putting into place something to see it through, isn't it?
So as I was trying to explain to you, of course, enforcement is difficult in a country where we don't have the control over the law enforcement authorities, but we've got a series of
That's here I'm talking about, where we do have control.
Can you let me answer the question? Because your question.
You're saying things that I haven't said, so I've got to clarify it. Otherwise, you're not going to have a chance to answer the question if you haven't understood it.
Well, why don't you pause and let me explain it, and then you can pick holes in it. Because I think people get fed up with media not allowing us to try and give at least honest answers, even if you don't accept them. So we can't control the law enforcement at the end, but we can make sure that, so in other countries, by definition, we can make sure no one can get on a flight unless they've had that first COVID test. We've got to try and find a safe way for British nationals to come home. In terms of what happens at the UK end, the rules are very clear. We are managing them as effectively as we can. There is increased border force resource. There's increased inspection spot checks in relation to the hotel quarantine. And of course, there are other people on these interviews that I've been doing who have been questioning whether actually the fines and the penalties are too severe. We are taking this seriously. There are robust sanctions if you flout the rules, but this is only one of the lines of defence that we've got in terms of not just protecting ourselves from the virus, but in terms of the risk that comes from abroad. So on the one hand, there'll be people that are saying we're taking too heavy-handed approach. We make no apologies for being robust. But as with enforcement across the board, not just in relation to this, but the wider social distancing and wider social measures and restrictions we've got in place, yes, it's difficult to enforce them. We do rely on people doing the right thing, but there is very clearly the penalties and the enforcement and the accountability, as we've already shown with the fines that have been levied, which have been high-level fines for those who are flouting the rules.
Dominic Raab, sorry, apologies for interrupting, because we wanted to give you a chance to answer the question. I think one of the issues that everybody feels is that you've implemented this idea of the hotel quarantines. We're trying to get the red list countries. Anyone flying back from those red list countries has to quarantine. Anecdotal evidence we've had from a colleague today is that he met somebody who had just flown in from Dubai via Germany and was out shopping the next day because he needed to get food, and wasn't remotely concerned about the fact that he'd flown via Germany and had managed to avoid any sort of quarantine, had come through immigration, hadn't been stopped, hadn't been checked at all. These people flying back from these red list countries are being allowed to mix with other passengers that are coming from European countries that aren't on the red list as well. So even if he had gone into quarantine, he'd been on a plane with lots of people coming in from Germany and could have spread the virus like that. Would you like to see a way of forcing these red list countries to be the passengers from those planes to be put onto planes with just them on it? So we know when they land, we know exactly where they've been, and then they don't have the chance of slipping through the net and they can be put into these hotels.
So first of all, anyone getting on a flight will have to have had a COVID negative test already. I take your point, but the numbers of coming back have reduced dramatically. It's only British nationals or residents that can return from those red list countries. There will always be an element of risk that we need to try and guard against for people trying to go around and circumvent the rules. And I think if there's any evidence, if you've got any evidence that individuals that you're aware of have been flouting the rules, it should be reported to the police.
Of course, and I'm sure that person will do that. It's not for us to do it now on air because they have to make their decision. The question I'm trying to ask is about policing. If I'm someone that's declared that I've come from that country and been honest, I've taken the fact I've got to pay the fine and go into quarantine, I'm going to feel pretty bitter if the idea that you argue is a good one to have this system, if the idea isn't enforced. And we've seen it all the way through, haven't we? Good ideas for the government, whether it be test or trace or whatever, not being enforced. So if you've put something into place like this, which has been coming and discussed for months, how can people be sure that you're enforcing it and make it happen? Where are the numbers? Where's the money for the numbers? Where's the support for that?
Well, I've set out that we've got extra checks. We've got the protection via the requirements getting on the plane. But with all law enforcement, the question is quite how proportionate the measures you are. Some people criticise us for being too robust. the penalties are too high. We had that debate when the fines were up to £10,000, where if you're fraudulently filling out the passenger locator form, there's potentially a sentence for at the maximum end of up to 10 years. And people, on the one hand, would say that that is too severe. We think we've taken a proportionate approach. The resources there. But of course, as with all of the measures that we've taken throughout the pandemic, vast majority of people adhere to them and follow the rules. And it's not a fine that you pay going into the government hotel quarantine. It's to cover the costs of doing it. And there's only a relatively small number of people that can avail themselves of this route because, as I said, if you're not a British national or resident, you're barred from coming back to the UK. So we're taking a targeted approach. It is a robust approach. I think the sanctions show that, and we think that's the right balance.
OK, we're going to have to let you go because we know you need to be elsewhere. But Dominic Raab, thanks for joining us.
All right,
Good to talk to you.